Hello, and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale, the Real Seeker. Today we've got a special treat. Shroud history, special guest, Pam Moon, returning. So let's get straight into that. And I had to record it on Zoom because Pam couldn't enter the StreamYard studio. For some reason, her computer wouldn't let her do that. So we recorded it on Zoom. And the issue is I was using my university account and I wasn't sure if it would last more than 1 hour. And so for that reason, I just let her give her presentation for as much as we could do without me intervening or asking questions throughout. But once it was clear that we could go past the 1 hour, I saved my questions for the end. So we do the complete show and then I bring in my questions at the end. So look out for that. It was a great show. Thank you so much to Pam Moon for being on. And look forward to Jack Marquardt giving his presentation on the Shroud history from 901 to 1204 AD later on this month. All right, that's it, and into the show.
Dale, thank you so much for allowing me to come onto your show and talk about the image of Edessa, because we need to find a history that takes the shroud, the Holy Shroud of Jesus, now in Turin, I believe, from Jerusalem to Turin, where it is today. And for that, we need, for it to be a reliable historical record, we need sources and provenance that we can trust. I wanted to start just briefly by talking about relics. A relic is that which is left behind. I wear my parents, the engagement ring my father gave to my mother as something that they left behind, a symbol of the love they had. Or it's an object esteemed and venerated because of an association with a saint or a martyr. And here I have a relic actually of Mother Teresa, now St. Teresa. Okay, there's a biblical background for relics. God did extraordinary miracles through Paul, so that even handkerchiefs and aprons that he touched were taken to the sick and their illnesses were cured. So Catholics, I've seen lots of relics of tiny fragments of St. Paul's clothing. And then this story, once when some Israelites were burying a man, suddenly they saw a band of raiders. So they threw the man's body into Elisha's tomb. When the body touched Elisha's bones, the man came to life and stood up on his feet. It's quite sad that today is the day that we remember another raid on Israel last year, which has led to war in Gaza and Lebanon. So pray for the peace of the Middle East. But going back to relics, the idea that Catholics or Orthodox Christians would throw away or neglect the burial shroud of Jesus Christ, which is the most important and the precious thing he left behind, I think shows a lack of understanding of the importance of relics to their beliefs. Now, I showed you before the Limburg Staratiki, which was created sometime between 945 and 985 by Constantine VII, Romanos, and Basil Lakapenos. Now, some kind soul has now actually translated what is inside that reliquary. So the swaddling clothes of Jesus and the winding sheet Jesus was wrapped in while he was in his tomb. So this is the year after the arrival of the image of Edessa into Constantinople. And in this reliquary, it is itemized that the winding sheet of Jesus, the burial shroud of Jesus, is with that reliquary. Now, I actually screenshot that from Wikipedia so that you can see it here, the winding sheet Jesus was wrapped in. And that fits with what the emperors wrote about it. So Christ with this formally smashed the gates of Hades, giving new life to the dead. That's a resurrection idea. And also this, Christ was complete with beauty, but he did not have form, which is a sort of allusion, I would argue, to the mystery that is the shroud. Now, the Limburg Staratiki slides in. It's a sliding case, if you can see what I mean, like this. One slides into the other.
Yep.
And I think that there was once another case, because the Shroud of Turin would not fit into the Limburg Steiretiki as it stands today. But if the Steiretiki was just a sliding case of another reliquary that held the shroud, then that would make sense. But that bottom bit is now lost, potentially. It could be somewhere, but it's not been found yet. Now, we see in the Skylitzes, which I talked to you about before, that, that there was a transfer of a golden case between these two leaders in 934. And inside the golden case, there is the holy woods. We've seen that on the Steiretiki, the cross of Christ, the holy Mandelion, which is the image of Edessa, Christ's autograph letter to Abgar, and the icon of the Mother of God. So those are the four things that were contained within it. Actually, the next thing I want to talk about is icons. Should we have icons? And one of the things I want to look at is the Byzantine iconoclasm and how it comes out in the Skylitzes. We talked about this before. Ravenna, here's a late 5th century, I would argue, image of Jesus looking nothing like Jesus as we would imagine today. And here is the king, Justinian the Great, the first, who reigned between these years, 482. No, these are his life years, 482 to 565. And then there's this other church in Ravenna. My father took me to Ravenna when I was a teenager. And there's this other church, which is a bit schizophrenic. So it shows Jesus. Again, you wouldn't recognize that as Jesus if someone showed it to you. And it also has this extraordinary image, which is very like how we imagine Jesus to be, and a much older Justinian. And of course, the Vignon markings of the similarities between these ancient icons of Christ and Jesus on the shroud would point to this being that this image was actually this, which would suggest that there's a change. Something happened between them drawing Jesus without a beard and with a fringe and him drawing him now. Now, the historian Ian Wilson has argued that it was the image of Edessa, which was later known in the 11th century as the Holy Mandelion, was the shroud. He's argued it's not made by hands and it was folded into 8 tetradiplon. Well, I'm not going to spend much time on this because we all know this very well, the discovery of the image of Edessa hidden in the walls of the city. And this is an ancient image of what the image of Edessa and the kramion, the tile that was found alongside it, might have looked like. And here the artist has drawn like a frill or a fringe around here to denote that this is linen, this is a cloth, this isn't a tile. But have a look at this patterning here, this diamond-shaped patterning. And now the old story of Abgar V, who was sick, and he wrote to Jesus asking him for help. And Jesus wrote back via a scribe and said he would send to him and would heal him. And the legend is that a disciple came, Abgar was miraculously healed, and his country became Christian. And here he is with another cloth with a fringe on it here, denoting that it's a cloth. And here is an image of Jesus in portrait. It's actually in landscape rather than portrait here. The image of Edessa stayed in Edessa until 5th of August 944, when it was brought to Constantinople. And from the synopsis of histories by John Skylitzes, Romanos I, who was the emperor, holds the cloth with veiled hands and worships it. Now, the sources I'm going to use the images are from the Illustrated Chronicle in Madrid. And actually, they put those images online now for the first time. So you can actually go on and you can see all these images. And also from a book by Vasiliki Samakta, who writes about, which I've been using for a number of years. I talked about it on the last show. And she uses a translation by Hans Thurn. Now, how reliable is the Skylitzes as a history, as a primary source? Well, it was written by John Skylitzes, who lived between 1040 and 1101. And the Madrid Skylitzes, which is a copy, it's the only surviving copy, made between 1130 and 1170s around in Sicily. And it's the only illuminated manuscript that tells a history of Constantinople from 811 to 1005. Now, historians work on the principle that the nearest you can get to an event, the most likely the source is to be genuine and to be reliable. So this is quite close to what they're describing. And in fact, this is the only evidence we have of Greek fire. Here's that there's a fire being this boat is being set fire by Greek fire. This is the only record we have from this manuscript. When I was last on your show, I was talking about this image, which shows the Varangian Guard in Constantinople. And what on earth are they doing? They arrived as a guard after 988. And I've tried to argue that this is the image of the Holy Shroud folded into 4 when it was damaged by incense, and that they are taking it on a litany procession. Now, we know the shroud was folded into 4 and damaged because here are the incense burns that go across it. Now, people have said in the past that this is caused by poker holes, as if someone attacked the shroud with a poker. But you can see there are multiple different sizes of these holes. There were multiple different pokers. And it fits very much with the use of incense. Now, this is myrrh and this is aloes. From the Baldwin catalogue, I used their stuff. You can see that the aloes, the grains of aloes are larger than the grains of myrrh. And so you get different sizes. Now, this is the image of Justinian we looked at a minute ago. And here in the corner, you can see someone has an open top thurible. So the chances are that someone spread hot incense grains onto the shroud to create this pattern of burning. Now, this is the event where the shroud was carried in a litany. I would argue the shroud was carried in a litany procession. But this is the thing I quoted from you on the last show. This is from Vasiliki's book. Because there was a drought and no rain had fallen for 6 months, the brothers of the emperor held a litany. John carried the Mandelion, Constantine the Christ's letter to Abgar, and George the Holy Shroud. Well, some shroud experts, John Mark Watts and Janice wrote to Vasiliki to ask her if this was a true quote. Is it really the shroud? And she wrote back and said, actually, I've misquoted the text. And it should actually read much more like this. I'm grateful to them, Janice Winchester. I'm really grateful to them for doing that, for asking those questions. And this is the Wortley translation. Because there was a drought and 6 months and no rain had fallen, the emperor's brothers held a procession. John carrying the Holy Mandelion, the great domestic, the letter of Jesus to Abgar, Christ to Abgar. George, the Holy Swaddling Bands. They travelled on foot from the great palace to the church of the exceeding Holy Mother of God, Blanchenoy. So we're looking at the Holy Mandelion, the image of Edessa, the letter of Christ to Abgar, and the swaddling bands of Jesus. Now, if you look at the Limburg Steiretiki, the swaddling clothes of Jesus are itemized in that reliquary. No mention of the letter of Jesus to Abgar, because that didn't arrive in Constantinople until after the reliquary was made. And again, the winding sheet Christ was wrapped in. So does that mean that the Holy Mandelion was the winding sheet that Jesus was wrapped in? Because those are the only 3 things that are itemized in there that are suggested were carried in that procession. So Constantine VII wrote a letter in the last years of his reign in which he wrote to his troops that he was sending them a supply of holy water that had been consecrated by contact from the relics of Christ's passion held in the palace. These relics included the precious wood of the cross, the sacred spargagna, which is the swaddling clothes of Jesus, and the sindon, the shroud, which God wore. So I would argue this litany procession is going to the church of St. Mary Blanchenoy, where the Crusaders reported seeing the shroud. And as it comes out of the palace, it's protected by the Varangian Guard. Now, is it the Varangian Guard? Yes, without question, this is the Varangian Guard who arrived in Constantinople in 988. Now, I wrote to 2 of the greatest Byzantine scholars in the world, Professor Judith Herrin and Dane Professor Avril Cameron. And I asked them about this Skylitzes image. You know, is this the Varangian Guard? And if so, what on earth are they doing? This is the reply I got from Judith Herrin. Just a quick note about your query. In checking the text of the Skylitzes, there's no mention of the Varangians being involved in dealing with the mutilated body of Leo V in 820, which is what the text says, nor are they mentioned in a much earlier chronicle. If this is an image of the Varangian Guard, it is clearly out of place in the account of Leo V's death. Since the soldiers were overseeing an event that takes place between the palace and the hippodrome, with mention of the Skylar Gate, I think reading the captions would be helpful. Many emperors were decapitated, so it may be a possibility of identifying this scene with other similar events. Well, I've been through the text, and there isn't another event that this could possibly describe. Every emperor is pretty much catalogued their death. And this is from Dane Professor Avril Cameron. I was really honoured that these really state-of-the-art Byzantine historians would actually bother writing to me. Dear Pam Moon, I know Judith Heron's already replied to you on the Varangians, and I appreciate your sincerity and commitment in the authenticity of the Shroud. I would like to say the following. The very detailed, complimentary, contemporary account of the arrival of the Mandelian in Constantinople under Constantine VII is entirely about the image of Edessa, not a burial shroud. I do not believe that the very large shroud was folded as you maintain, or that the Mandelian was identified as a burial cloth. It is depicted very commonly in later icons and frescoes, and always as a facial image only. Supposing you were right to identify as the Mandelian, there would be no historical record earlier than the late 6th century. Incidentally, I once went to Turin to see the shroud when it was displayed, but that did not change my view. Best wishes, Avril Cameron. And I am honoured. These women are, and I'm not criticising them in any way in terms of their huge knowledge of Byzantine history.
Yeah, and Cameron, just for the audience, she's a Shroud skeptic, kind of thing.
Indeed,
So
indeed, absolutely. And Dale, what I want to go on to do is to look at the theories that she puts forward about the image of Edessa, and whether I would agree with them, and whether they hold up. She wrote this paper called the History of the Image of Edessa, the Telling of a Story, in 1980. Well, that was 44 years ago. And history moves on, new things come to light. I couldn't have told you when I last spoke to you that the Limburg Staratiki actually itemizes the burial shroud of Jesus. I couldn't have told you that because I hadn't seen that translation. So things move on. And the wonderful Shroud scholar, Professor Cheryl White, historian, and I wrote a reply to Avril Cameron's thesis in that paper from 1980. So her main arguments are, there are many arguments, but these I'm just picking out three. There's no evidence for the image of Edessa before the 6th century. For example, Egreria, Eusebius, who visited Edessa, don't mention the shroud. She's fairly sure that the shroud is a 6th century painting, and of the face of Christ. And the emperors perpetuated this not made by hands myth for political ends in order to control their very devout citizens. Okay, so these are the sort of arguments that we were arguing against, and that's where I'll go with this presentation, if that's okay. So what evidence is there before the 6th century for a shroud and for the image of Edessa? Well, it's interesting. In the Bible, every gospel mentions that Jesus was married in a linen cloth. Matthew, Mark, Luke all mention it. St. John goes into a lot more detail with the sudarium and the strips of linen. But they all mention linen cloth. Now, that's very unusual. It's very rare to see an obituary of someone that says they were buried in an oak coffin. We just don't do that. You know what I mean? So why would they pick out those things? The shroud, and in fact, there's very few things that actually appear in every gospel. So the death and the resurrection of Jesus appear in every gospel. I think the feeding of the 5,000 is in every gospel, and the shroud is in every gospel. So there's some history there, which is primary to Jesus. And then there's this, the gospel according to the Hebrews, when the Lord Jesus had given the linen shroud to the servant of the priest, the high priest, he went and appeared to James. So who was the servant of the high priest? Well, in Luke's gospel, the description of the Garden of Gethsemane, Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. That's in John. And then Luke continues, Jesus answered, no more of this. And he touched the man's ear and healed him. So in the Gospel of the Hebrews, Jesus himself gives his shroud to this gentleman called Malchus, who was the servant of the high priest. Now, in the second century, Cheryl picked this out. There's this description of the hymn of the pearl. At once, as soon as I saw it, the glory looked like my own self. Moreover, the King of Kings image was depicted entirely all over it. So the image of Jesus is all over this cloth, described by a Syrian writer. So what evidence is that links Abgar V to Jesus? Well, the autographed letter of Jesus to Abgar V. This is the Skylitzes story. In 1031, George Maniakis defending Edessa against an Arab attack, and he found the autographed letter Christ sent to King Abgar and sent it to the emperor in Constantinople. Now, that same letter was in the golden case that the Holy Mandelion and the Holy Woods were also in, and it was carried in the litany procession in 1036. Now, this is just a bit of an aside, but how did Jesus autograph his name? I've got the autograph of St. Teresa here, but how did Jesus write his name? Well, in Hebrew, sorry, where am I going here? Yeshua would look like this. And what it contains within it is a fabulous letter, the letter Shin in Hebrew. Now, the letter Shin is extremely important in Hebrew thought. It's the first letter of the word Shaddai, which means the name of God. The first letter of Shalom, the peace and wholeness of God. The first letter of Shekinah, the glory and the presence of God. The first letter of Shema, which is the condensed law. It's found on the mezuzah. Jews believe that the letter Shin is written on the ventricles of the heart. If you look at the shroud and you look at it sideways on as it's presented horizontally, this is the letter Shin as it would have been written 2,000 years ago. And St. John in Revelation writes, in heaven they will see his face and his name will be written on their foreheads. So what else is there that links the letter of Jesus to Abgar V? Well, Igreria and Eusebius both mention it. And in my last talk with you, I talked about the text of the letter of Jesus to Abgar, where basically he says that I must do what my Father has sent me to do, but I will send to you one of my disciples after I've risen and heal you. Now, Eusebius and Igreria, as Professor Cameron rightly points out, don't mention the image of Edessa. But that doesn't mean that it was not in Edessa. Absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. If you went to Turin today, you wouldn't see the shroud. Doesn't matter how important you were, if you went today, you wouldn't see it, but it is there. Okay, next I want to look at the folding patterns, because one of the things that Professor Cameron wrote in her letter was that she didn't believe the folding patterns of the Skylitzes image, that the shroud was folded into 4 when it was damaged by incense. So let's just have a look for a moment at the physical evidence on the shroud that it was folded into 8 tetradiplon, as Ian Wilson has argued. Well, John Jackson, the great shroud scientist, identified raking light fold marks across the shroud. So there are a few across the head, and there are 4 across the hands, just below the hands here. There's another one here, another one here, which would suggest that the shroud has been folded in its history. And what he argues is that this pattern here, particularly this 4 folds here, is part of a showing of the shroud when it was showed from the head down to the hands, and the Crusaders saw it. This is what one of the Crusaders wrote. My Lady St. Mary of Branchline, where there was the sing-domes in which Jesus, our Lord, had been wrapped, or the shroud in which he was wrapped, which every Friday raised itself upright so you could see the form of our Lord on it. Okay, so just have a look at the folding patterns. The length of the shroud is 4.4 meters. Its width is 1.1 meter. Now, this is the incense damage, where it was folded down the middle and central down there. And you can see this is the largest burn patch. This is the second, this is the third, and this is the fourth. Now, this is the fire damage from 1532. And I've tried to put this red line through where the patches are, so you can see. This is the water damage. Now, this goes, again, the shroud is folded twice down the center. And then this bit here, can you see this is the water damage? And you can see, oh yeah, it's probably concertinaed like that. So for my exhibition, I pinned the shroud to a backing cloth. And when I put the backing cloth away, what I tend to do is stand with somebody else 15 feet away, and we fold it in half, and then we meet in the middle and then try and fold it from there. The problem with that is it drags the cloth along the floor. And I'm not sure that's what the ancients would have wanted to do with the Holy Shroud. So if you lay it out and you fold it down the center line first, and then you concertina it, you would stop it draping on the floor and show it respect. Now, the water damage and the fire damage don't match, particularly around here. You can see that this diamond water pattern here doesn't match this here. Now, how would it have been folded to fit into the Limburg Styrotiki? Well, the dimensions of the Constantine and Romanos side of the Styrotiki are 28 centimeters by 45 centimeters. The Basil Lakipenos are 35 centimeters by 48 centimeters. So to create that folding pattern, you need to fold it into 4. And then to fit easily within a reliquary within that dimension, you need to fold it, concertina it into 10 folds. So they would be 27.5 centimeters and 44 centimeters. And then it would fit comfortably into that box. So you can see that here we're looking at possibly 5 different folding patterns. There's the folding patterns just below the hands. There's the fire and the water damage. And then there's the possibly the Limburg Styrotiki folding pattern. And you can see that showing the shroud just as a face here would actually be quite easy to do if you're prepared to fold it. Here we go, here we have it folded. So all you can see is the face. It's really easy to do. But you know, in some ways I have huge sympathy for Professor Cameron. We don't talk about, as shroudies, we don't talk about the background folding patterns of the shroud very often. Most people, to be honest with you, from my experience of exhibitions, 50% of the people who wander into the churches have never heard of the shroud, let alone know that it's been folded so many times in its history. But this is how, if you compare this, this is how the Holy Mandelion, the image of Edessa, was presented over many, many years. Now, one of the reasons for that, I think, is because actually the shroud is very difficult to display. This is my my shroud replica, which I got from Barry Schwartz. And here it is at Bournemouth Oratory, where it's currently on display. You can see it's huge. So to show that is very difficult, but to show this is really easy. It's really easy and very, I mean, obviously that's the black and white negative rather than the shroud as it looks like in the natural form. It's really easy if you're prepared to fold it to get that image. Now, this I think is really fascinating. So, you noticed before we looked at this diamond pattern in the background. And I think Ian Wilson and David Rolfe, the great shroud scholars, have argued that the ancients folded it into 8 so that just this was showing. And then they put like a golden trellis over it to enhance it, and so that all you saw was the face in the center. But what was the muse for that trellis? Just have a look at this for a minute. I've blown this up, but this pattern here exactly matches the same sort of pattern that is on from the water damage, from the diamond-shaped water damage. I find that really fascinating. And here, this is after the shroud has arrived, Okay, the Holy Mandelion, the image of Edessa, has arrived in Constantinople in 944. This is the Limburg Saratibi. Can you see there's the same pattern behind the image of Christ on his throne? I personally would argue that this is Constantine VII. I know other people would say it's his father. And here you find the same pattern behind Christ on the throne. And if you match those up to this water damage pattern, you find it also matches. So it's as if the ancients knew there was a background pattern to the shroud itself. So on the last time I was on your show, I talked about this diamond water stain patterning here that you see on many ancient images of Jesus. So this is the Gospel of Judith of Flanders, who died in 1095. And you see this diamond pattern. It's not a diaphragm, this is a diamond pattern. They knew, they'd seen it. And this folding pattern, I think, has to be pre-11th century. Where does it start? Well, to get this pattern, basically the entry point for the water has to be here, and then it spreads out. And can you see that the whiplashes on the body here are quite clear, but across the image where it's water damage, you lose them. The shroud doesn't actually respond very well. The image of the shroud doesn't respond very well to water damage. It dilutes the image. But in order to do that, to create that pattern, the shroud needs to be folded, and then it needs to be stored upright, and the water comes from the bottom. So it's stored, this is a first century from the Dead Sea Scrolls, maybe pre-first century actually, in the Met Museum in New York. So we have to find a history for this diamond pattern, and I would try and argue that the Daesan River in Edessa was known as the skipping or jumping river because it burst its banks on numerous times. Example in 2004, 204, 305, 415. It burst its banks. So was the image of Edessa hidden in the walls to protect it from water damage? Or did it get damaged after a flood, which just touched the hiding place where it was? It can't spread that far, the water. Obviously, it hasn't spread that far. But we need to find a history for the diamond pattern. Okay, I want to look at another piece of evidence now that the ancients had the Holy Shroud. We go back to Justinian here in this image in Ravenna, and he's wearing what's called the tableon. Now, after the discovery, oh, wait a minute, one before we go, this is a wonderful mosaic in Hagia Sophia. So this is Our Lady, and it is the Feast of the Holy Rosary today. So this is Mary, Our Lady, known as the Theotokos in Constantinople, and here is Christ sitting on her lap. This is Constantine the Great offering the city of Constantinople to them. And here is Justinian I offering the Cathedral of Hagia Sophia, San Sophia, in Constantinople to them. Both of them are wearing what is called the loros. Now, the loros wasn't worn until towards the end of Justinian's reign. This is Hagia Sophia, San Sophia, survived earthquakes. It's an amazing building, great testament to Justinian I. Now, my great friend Joanne Bywater discovered the significance of the loros to shroud studies because it represents the winding sheet of Jesus. So here is, I think, Constantine VII wearing his loros. It's wearing the winding sheet of Jesus. Now, why would they do that if they didn't have it? It doesn't make any sense if they didn't. Now, the first artistic representation of the loros comes on a coin from Justinian II, who died in 711. So it's quite early, this. And you can see him here wearing his loros. And here is an image of Christ, looking very like a shroud image, don't you think? Now, that caused the first Byzantine iconoclasm. And I'm going to talk about that for a minute now, if that's okay. So a caliph, al-Malik, refused to use this imagery on his coins. And iconoclasm is a big thing. It was huge in the Reformation. And it comes from one of the Ten Commandments, which says this: you shall not make for yourself an idol or a likeness of anything in heaven above, or on the earth below, or in the waters beneath the earth. You shall not bow down before them or serve them. So you shan't make any images. Now, so iconography is rejected in both Jewish and Muslim worship. And the first Byzantine iconoclasm took place between 730 and 787, and it led to the destruction of icons and paintings. Now, it ended with the Second Council of Nicaea on October the 13th, 787. And this is what they said, and I'll read it if that's okay. Venerable and holy images are to be dedicated in the holy churches of God, namely the image of our Lord and God and Saviour, Jesus Christ, of our Immaculate Lady, the Holy Theotokos, and of the angels and of the saints. They are to be accorded the veneration of honour, not indeed the true worship paid to the divine nature alone, but in the same way as it is accorded to the life-giving cross, the Holy Gospels, and other sacred offerings. So they're saying it's okay to have icons. Now, actually, they talk about the Theotokos. St. Mary was the first image of Mary ever believed to have been created was actually done by St. Luke. He was a physician, but he was also an artist. Now, I think that original image that Luke did of Mary is now missing, but these are some of the icons that follow that tradition. Now, one of the reasons that the council allowed for the restoration of icons was because St. John Damascene, who was a doctor of the Catholic Church, was sent to Edessa to look at the image of Edessa, to see if it gave permission to have images of Jesus. And this is what he wrote after seeing the image. Previously, God, who has neither body nor a face, absolutely could not be represented by an image. But now that he has made himself visible in the flesh and has lived with men, I can make an image of what I have seen of God and contemplate the glory of the Lord, his face unveiled. So here is St. John Damascene saying he sees an image in Edessa of the glory of the Lord, his face unveiled. You know, he wrote some hymns, actually. He was a great hymn writer. And one of those hymns, The Day of Resurrection, we still sing in the church today. And verse 2 says this: our hearts be pure from evil, that we may see aright the Lord in rays eternal of resurrection light. You know, I think, you know, some of the Shroud scholars, like Paolo de Lazzaro, who are saying that the image of the Shroud was probably created by some form of bursts of light, flashes of light, could identify with what St. John Damascene writes here. You know, and this is someone who wrote 1300 years. He also wrote this: the beauty of images moves me to contemplation, as the meadow delights the eyes and subtly infuses the soul with the glory of God. So as we look at creation and we love the glory of God, we see the glory of God, so when we look at the icon, we can see and contemplate the image of Christ. So this question, if St. John Damascene went to Edessa, this suggests that the image of Jesus was not in Constantinople at that point, arguably. Okay, well, that wasn't the end. It led to the second Byzantine iconoclasm, which was between 814 and 842. And these are the three emperors who perpetuated it. But before we look at that, this is I can't pronounce the word, from the mid-9th century. And it shows John Grammaticos, who was the advisor to the emperors Leo V, the one who had his head cut off, and Theophilus, and the Patriarch of Constantinople. And at that time, the holy relics were thrown in the marketplace and insulted. So here he has an image of Jesus Here is Jesus crucified with a right-sided wound. So by the mid-9th century, they knew his wound was in the right side. And here is the image of Edessa that he's rubbing out with a sponge. He's trying to destroy it. Now, one of the emperors that we just looked at who was involved in the iconoclasm is Theophilus, who was proclaimed emperor in 829. And here he is wearing his golden loris. And here he is riding to the church of St. Mary of God at Planchenoit, that really important church where the litany procession took, I would argue, the Shroud of Jesus, and where the Crusaders reported seeing it. Now, Michael II, Theophilus's father, ordered his son to slay the iconophile bishop by beating him with oxen sinews. So here you can see this bishop being murdered for using icons. The cruel Theophilus tortured and exiled the Abramite monks. They died as a result of their whipping. Their buried bodies remained intact for a long time until a few faithful men found them and appropriately buried them as martyrs of Christ. Another monk who was a recently consecrated priest appeared in front of the emperor and defended the veneration of icons by quoting a passage from St. Paul. Now, I'm using this passage as an illustration that the Skylitzes, although it's a fabulous text, which has got so much information about what was happening in Constantinople during these years, is a copy. So here, the text is talking about the emperor. Actually, what they'd substituted the image of the Empress Theodora, the wonderful Theodora, instead by mistake. Because Theophilus detested the icons, he ordered all icon painters to depart. If they wanted to live, they should spit on the icons and trample them as if they were evil. Among the iconophiles, there was a famous icon painter, the monk Lazarus. Theophilus at first tried to convert him by flattering him. As soon as the emperor realized that he could not achieve his purpose with discussion, he tortured and imprisoned Lazarus. He burned the hands of Lazarus with iron horseshoes. You can see that happening here, so that he couldn't paint again. But miraculously, he did manage to paint, and he did a painting of St. John the Baptist. Theophilus lost his patience and ordered the Graftoy brothers to be beaten in the garden of the palace and have verses composed on them, tattooed on their foreheads. So this is a brief description. The Emperor Theophilus was, like his father Michael II and Leo V, against the veneration of icons and severely punished iconophiles. He ordered that no icons should be painted at all, because one could only depict the truth. All the holy images were therefore removed from the churches and were substituted by pictures of birds and animals. The holy relics were thrown in the marketplaces and insulted. The prisons were full of monks, bishops, priests, and icon painters. The iconophiles were not allowed to come to the city, so that the monasteries were filled with them. But there's another side to the story as well. The 5 daughters of Theodora, Theophilus's wife, and they're named here, they are with their grandmother, who blessed them with icons, which she kept hidden in a chest, by bringing them close to their face and lips, and thus simulated their love of icons. And then there's this wonderful story of Theodora. So the Empress Theodora secretly venerated the icons. Dendrus, a rather naive and entertaining eunuch, once entered the room of the Empress and surprised her while worshipping an icon. He asked her what she was doing, and she replied that she was playing with dolls. Just a wonderful story, isn't it? Well, Theophilus died in 843, and at first the Empress Theodora hesitated to restore the icons out of respect for her husband and because she was afraid of the iconoclasts. But Theodora, who secretly worshipped the icons anyway, ordered a council with the Senate, and the council condemned iconoclasm and decided to restore the veneration of icons. And then this lovely story. During the feast in the palace, held at the occasion of the restoration of the icons, the Graftoy brothers, who had suffered under Theophilus, were among the guests. Whenever Theodora looked at the verses engraved on their faces, she began to cry. That's just such a lovely story. So what happened to Grammaticos? Well, he was confined to a monastery, escaped with his life. There he saw icons portraying the Mother of God, the Theotokos, Christ and the archangels, and he ordered his deacon to climb up and scratch out the eyes of the figures. So let's have a quick look at some of Dane Professor Avril Cameron's ideas. There's no evidence for the image of Edessa before the 6th century. Well, I would say that there is. There's so much biblical records about the Shroud, letter of Jesus to Abgar, the hymn of the pearl, the folding pattern showing how it's folded. The Shroud is a 6th century painting. Well, St. John Damascene, I can make an image of what I have seen of God and contemplate the glory of the Lord, his face unveiled when he saw it. This is not a painting. He didn't report seeing a painting. He reported seeing something very different. The emperors perpetuated the not made by hands myth for political ends in order to control their citizens. But they were prepared to kill people who'd made icons and worshipped the image of Edessa. So why would they perpetuate this not made by hands myth? But also, I want to carry on. Dale, can you still hear me all right?
Yep, everything's clear
Oh,
throughout.
good, thanks. Oh, thank you. I just wanted to check before I ramble on too much. I also want to look at uh, this idea that the emperors were basically manipulating people with what was a lie, and look at the people who cared for the shroud after it arrived, who cared for the image of Edessa, the Holy Mandelion, after it arrived in Constantinople. Here we see the arrival. We see that Romanos holds it and worships it. Now, the Council of Nicaea, do you remember, said you're not supposed to worship it in the way that you would worship God. But what's really interesting in the Orthodox tradition, if the shroud is the burial shroud of Jesus, if what has just arrived in Constantinople is the burial shroud of Jesus, then it contains his blood. So it is the blood of Christ. It is his image. So in some ways, the idea of worshipping it is not as iconic, is not as disobedient to the commandments as you might expect. And then we get this sermon. Then the day after the arrival of the Holy Mandelion, we get this sermon of Gregory, the deacon Gregory. And these are the translations. Now, in history, the nearer, as I mentioned a minute ago, the nearer you can get to an event with a source, the more likely it is to be true. So this is what he says. For this is not the art of painting, which provides a door for the mind to consider the original and depicts images. He's talking about this image of Edessa. This reflection was imprinted from the living original. Painting establishes a complete form with various beautiful colours, representing the cheeks with blooming red, the encircling of the lips with red. It paints the beard with flowery gold, the eyebrows with shining black, the whole eye with beautiful colours, the ears and the nose in a different way, overshadowed the flanks of the imprint with a compound of qualities and showing the chin with hair. He's saying that the image of Edessa is not a painting. He said, this reflection, however, let everyone be inspired by the explanation, has been imprinted only by, and he says, the sweat from the face of the originator of life, falling like drops of blood, and by the finger of God. For these are the beauties that have made up the true imprint of Christ, since after the drops fell, it was embellished by drops from his own side. Both are highly instructive. Blood and water there, here sweat and image. So here is an image that is not a painting. This is what's written immediately after its arrival in Constantinople. And he's also saying it contains the wound to Christ's side. So it's not just a face either. Now, I want to talk for a moment, if you don't mind, if you've got time, just to look at the people who received this image of Edessa. So we've looked at Romanos, who sent the army to Edessa to get it, who worships it as it arrives. We've looked at Constantine, who was married to Romanos's daughter, and Basil Lecapenos, who was Romanos's illegitimate son. Now, but Romanos II is Constantine and Helene's son. Let's have a look. I think here we go. So here is, but oh, sorry, but actually let's go back for that just a minute, because we're also going to go on, if we can, in a minute, to look at their successors. So Romanos had 3 children, Basil II, Constantine VIII, and Anna, who married Vladimir the Great, who sent the Varangian Guard to Constantinople. And then Constantine VIII's daughter, Zoe, became Queen Empress. She had 3 husbands, and Michael IV was the one who ordered the litany procession. Okay, so here we are, Romanos ivories. Here's Constantine in 945 being blessed by Jesus wearing his laurels. Here is Romanos II at his marriage being blessed by Jesus wearing the laurels. Seems to have four patches across here, almost like the folding marks that you might see on the shroud. Anyway, he's wearing the laurels again. And the similarity between the image of Christ on the shroud and this ivory. There was an outpouring of art, a lot of it done by Basil Leckerpen. The Limbo Saratiki we've already looked at. So Mark Guskin describes an anonymous Latin text from the 11th century, which says, this wonderful linen cloth with the face of the Lord Jesus marked by direct contact is kept in greater veneration than the other relics in the palace and held in such high esteem that it is always kept in a golden case and very carefully locked up. It is only not opened for anyone except the Emperor of Constantinople. Okay, so here is Hagia Sophia again, Saint Sophia, and this is the center of worship in San Sophia. This is the altar here, you can see in this image. Now, I want to draw your attention to that because it was 14 foot long, the same length as the Holy Shroud of Turin. And Robert de Clary wrote this, person who described seeing the Holy Shroud at the Church of St. Mary Blancherai. He wrote this. And the high altar of this minster is so rich that the price could not be reckoned, for the table which lay upon the altar was of gold and of precious stones, all squared and grounded and all fast joined together, which a certain rich emperor caused to be made. And this table was a full 14 feet in length, and about the altars were pillars, and he goes on about this. So it's a 14-foot long call. I think it was sacked out of Constantinople in 1204, and we believe it's at the bottom of the Bosphorus somewhere. The ship it was on sank. So the next source I want to use is Constantine's Book of Ceremonies, because he describes in great detail the different ceremonies that took place in Hagia Sophia after the arrival of the Holy Mandeli and the Image of Edessa. Okay, he mentions changing the altar cloth on Good Friday. Now, traditionally in Orthodox thought and Catholic thought, the altar cloth is associated with the linen of Christ, with his shroud. But so the emperor entered the sanctuary at Hagia Sophia, and taking a censer, he censers the altar from all sides. And after changing the holy altar cloth, he places a purse on it. Leaving the sanctuary, he goes to the chapel of the Holy Casket. Okay, so this is the emperor changing the holy altar cloth. Really? Interesting. On Easter Saturday, together with the patriarch, the emperor again changes the altar cloth. After changing the cloths on the holy altar, he takes 100 pounds of gold and places it on the holy altar, on the little step on which the emperor stands. When he has changed the holy altar cloth, he takes another purse containing a very large amount of money and places it on the holy altar. Now I want to read this, if that's all right, because this is an explanation of what's called the epitafios. I hope I pronounced that right, epitafios procession. The changing of the altar cloth on Good Friday and Easter Saturday is established in the Eastern Orthodox liturgy today. Normally done by the patriarchs and priests, it's associated with the carrying of the epitafios, or winding sheet of Jesus, with the burial sheet of Jesus. The epitafios is removed from the altar towards the end of Good Friday service and returned on Easter Saturday before the resurrection celebrations on Easter Sunday. Among the Orthodox, the winding sheet is most commonly known by its Greek name, epitafios. Some suggest it was inspired by the presence in Constantinople between the 10th and the 13th century of a shroud believed to be the one in which Jesus was buried. So before, we've seen Constantine writing about how he goes into the sanctuary, to the altar in Hagia Sophia on Good Friday, and changes the altar. We talk here, and then he takes it to the chapel of the Golden Casket, comes back on Easter Saturday and changes the altar cloth again and puts, I would argue, the burial shroud of Jesus out on the altar. Now, this is an ancient epitassios. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. And you can see it's probably the length of the shroud, but actually all they ever show is the frontal view of the man with the shroud. There are lots of examples of them. The Pray manuscript is probably one too, but these are lots of examples. It's still used today in Orthodox liturgy. So there are possibly 6 folding patterns to the shroud. I'm going to talk about them in the order in which I think they probably happened historically. So I think the water damage here was the first. Then I think the Limburg Staratiki, after it arrived in the folding pattern. So it just shows this bit, the image of Edessa. The Limburg Staratiki, where it was folded after it arrived in Constantinople. The Epitatheos procession.
Pam, sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt. I know we might be a little
Yeah.
bit. Do you mind just giving the dates, the numbered dates next to each of these ones when you think like when the water happened or yeah.
Okay, well, I think the water happened before it was discovered in Edessa. I think it was caused by the river flooding and just touching the bottom of the terracotta jar in which the shroud was held. That's what I would argue, which picks up when they show the Holy Mandelion. That picks up that same triangular diamond-shaped pattern that they seem to use when they associated, which is very associated with the Holy Mandelion image. The Limbo Staratiki was created after the arrival of the image of Edessa so it is created between 945 when Constantine becomes emperor and 985 when Basil Lecapenus died. The Epitatheos, I think, is associated with that at the same time. But because I think they probably only showed the shroud, I don't think they showed the back image of the shroud. They only showed the front. There's no record of the back of the man of the shroud in these early icons or images that are coming out of Constantinople. So I think it was possibly folded just like that. Then I think in 1036, when they transferred it from the palace to the Church of St. Mary Blanchardine, I think that's when the incense burnt happened. These here, they're very faint on the front image. And then I think it was perhaps shown as Christ as the man of sorrows, where you get these marks, these raking-like marks. So after 1036, and then the fire and glass water damage, 1532. So does that make sense? Those historical dates.
Yep, perfect.
Okay, thanks, great.
No
So
worries.
I've talked about this before, this amazing description of wearing the winding cloth of Jesus, the loros, when Constantine goes into the church on Easter Sunday morning. This is the resurrection. I shall sketch an outline of it. I will read it again. I know I read it on the last show, but as we see it from our concepts of piety, think of the magisterioi, the patricians, putting on the lori on the feast of the resurrection of the Lord, of Christ our God, and representing his laying out for burial on an altar that's 14 feet long. And they're being made of gold. So the outside of the loros is gold for the splendor of the day, as being struck by the rays of the sun from the resurrection of Christ our Lord. So the back of the loros is plain to represent the burial shroud of Jesus. The outside is gold to represent his resurrection. We think of both the magisterium and the patricians themselves as representing the apostles and the good emperor, insofar as it is possible, as being analogous to God. So he gains his right to rule by having in his possession the burial shroud of Jesus Christ, which he wears ceremonially as a ceremonial representation around his neck. So was Constantine VII the idolatrous, lying manipulator who basically had a 6th century painting and he was pretending all of this? Or did he have the shroud of Jesus Christ? Well, this is the description of the burial of Constantine VII. At the burial site, it was the emperor's personal attendant, Basil Lecapenus, his wife's stepbrother, who took over. With his own hands, as is customary for the dead, he takes his all-holy body and winds him in a burial shroud in the manner of Lazarus. So Constantine is buried in a shroud, and this description, his all-holy body, that Basil saw a holiness in Constantine. This is not a deceiver to my mind. This is someone who genuinely had the shroud of Jesus Christ. Okay, can we come on just a little bit now to the people who follow on from this? And I want to look at these: Basil, Constantine, Anna. Now, a couple of years ago at a British Shroud of Turin Society conference, I presented a paper on the conversion of the Ukraine and Russia by the Shroud of Turin, in my opinion. And it's on the video section of the newsletter. And again, pray for peace of Ukraine and Russia. Okay, this is the Varangian Guard. They were the army that came out of Vladimir the Great. Let's go back a minute. So Anna here marries Vladimir the Great. We'll tell that story in a second. So here is Vladimir the Great, who sent the Varangian Guard in 988 to Constantinople. Now, here he is this is Kiev, and this is Novgorod, and this is a huge statue to him just erected in Moscow. He is the great saint of the Russian and the Ukrainian people because he brought Orthodox Christianity to them. Now, it's interesting that Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky are both named after this great leader. But you know what? He wasn't always great. He was the illegitimate son of the Prince of Kiev. And after his father died, he fled north and he came back with a Viking army. And he wanted to marry someone called Rognida, Polish princess. She didn't want to marry him because he wasn't the legitimate heir to the throne of Kiev. So he went to her house and he killed her parents and her brothers after letting them watch him rape Rognida. Now, he had about 7 wives and he had 800 concubines. He was known as the great fornicator. He wasn't a great man, and yet he is a great saint of Ukraine and Russia. There's hope for all of us, isn't there? Anyway, this is the land that he ruled. Here is, let's see, where's Kiev? Here's Kiev, and Novgorod is over here towards Russia. Here we are, Novgorod here. And here, he right up into the north, where the Vikings were. This is the land, they were also called the Kievan Rus, out of Kiev. Well, Rognida, 10 years after she was forced to marry, Vladimir tried to kill him by stabbing him to death. She failed, he woke up. But that just gives an example of what a man he was. Well, in the 980s, Vladimir decided he wanted, he tired of his profligate life and he wanted to find faith. And he sent envoys to all the religions around the world at that time. And when they came back from Constantinople, they said they didn't know if they were in heaven or on earth. They were so amazed at what they saw. Here is Vladimir with the cathedral, the basilica that he built. Well, he wanted to marry Anna, who was the daughter of Romanos II, who we've looked at a minute ago, the granddaughter of Constantine VII. Now, Anna was beautiful and lovely, and she didn't want to marry Vladimir the Great. She did not want to marry this man. She said she'd rather die in Constantinople. Don't blame her. But Vladimir moved his army down to modern day, this is the Crimea, and he threatened Constantinople. And so Basil, Anna's sister, had no choice but to give up his beautiful sister to this barbarian from the north. This is Basil in the Melodian of Basil II. I think this has been an enhanced image, but here you can see Jesus in an image of Edessa image, putting the crown on Basil's head. Well, Anna specified that she would marry him on one condition, that he became a Christian. And so in 988, Vladimir the Great baptized his entire Kievan Rus in the river Dnieper in Kyiv, in Ukraine. And the whole of Russia and Ukraine at that time became Christian. And he sent as a wedding gift to Basil II 6,000 Kievan Rus to Constantinople. This is the army that we can see here. He sent them in 988. And over the years, Anna also supplemented that army. These were the finest warriors in the world. They were Vikings, essentially, carrying the Dane axe, which is the Viking weapon. The descriptions of them in Constantinople where they dangled the axe on their shoulders. You can see here in this image, they're fully dressed. They've got their whole weaponry on. They've got the flags flying, the sun's shining. This is some great event. Now, he built Vladimir the Great built some churches. This is San Sofia, Kiev, which was started quite early. And here is the Christ Pantocrator in San Sofia. And this is the Desis from San Sofia. And this is the Desis from Constantinople. This is an 11th century image. This is actually earlier. So this predates, I think this is 1100. This, so perhaps 12th century. This is 11th century. Predates the image of Christ in Constantinople. And here it is in Kyiv, in Ukraine. He also built San Sofia North. Hi.
Oh, sorry. Just so first of all, it looks like just so the audience knows that I wasn't interjecting with questions this whole time because I was worried about a possible time limit. But I think we've been recording for more than an hour, so it looks like there's maybe not a problem. So that's great. So I just wanted to interject. So this picture that's older than the Pantocrator one. When does this date from? The one that's in Kiev now?
Yeah, the one in Kiev. I think that's around the time the cathedral was built. And the cathedral, I think San Sofia, so San Sofia Kyiv, I think predates Novgorod, and it was built by Vladimir the Great.
Oh, okay. So
let's have a look at the date. Let's have a look at the dates for Vladimir again. Hang on a sec. So Vladimir is 985 to 1015.
Okay.
So he certainly started it and got a long way towards building it. And so it's interesting that this image of which I would say is a shroud image has found its way to Kyiv before this image was created in Constantinople. I think that's interesting.
Gotcha.
This is San Sofia Novgorod, which was probably built by his son and his grandson, Yaroslav the Wise. And this is probably the oldest religious building in Russia. And this is the Novgorod icon, which dates to 1100. So again, this is very early as an image of Jesus. And you can see, and in fact, within the Ukrainian, the Russian tradition, there's a great love of what they call the Holy Mandelion. It's not called the Image of Edessa, it's called the Holy Mandelion. But actually, people like Constantine VII didn't actually use the word Mandelion. It doesn't appear in his Book of Ceremonies at all. He tends to use the winding cloth of Jesus in the Limbo Staratiki instead. So it's all about terminology in some ways, isn't it? So I would argue that these images are based around the Shroud, which would suggest that the Shroud must have been in Constantinople by, well, the 11th century. Yeah. Now this, moving on to Anna, Zoe, who was Anna's niece, she became emperor when her father Constantine the eighth died. Basil II didn't have any children, so the throne passed to Constantine the eighth, and his daughter Zoe became the empress. Now this is a wonderful mosaic in Hagia Sophia, and you can see Jesus looking very like the Shroud here, the divided beard, the long hair either side. It's this mark here. This is an image of Christ from the Shroud, without any question, I would argue. And this is Zoe. And it's interesting. She had three husbands. The second of whom was Michael IV, who sent the golden casket to Delasanos. Do you remember we looked at that earlier? Because Delasanos didn't want to be party to serving under Michael IV. And there's a reason for that. So Zoe's first husband was Romanos III, who brought the letter of Jesus up to Abgar, to Constantinople in 1031. But Zoe was having an affair, we believe, with Michael IV, who was a commoner. And Romanos III died unexpectedly in his bath. And it was thought that he'd been murdered and that Michael was the culprit. And so Zoe went on to marry Michael on the same day as Romanos died. So you can see that Michael IV needed some pretty powerful stuff to get people to believe that he was capable of being emperor, which is why I think he sent the Holy Mandelion in that golden box. And I think it was the Shroud that convinced Lasanos to come and work alongside Michael. But this mosaic is Constantine the ninth, who was her third husband. And actually I don't know if you can see it here, she actually scraped out the picture. Someone scraped out the picture of the previous husband and put in a new one. Mosaics can be altered. Okay, here we go. The emperor's brother held a procession. John carried the Holy Mandelion, the great domestic is the letter of Jesus Christ to Abgar, and George, the holy swaddling bands. We've seen all of those in the Limbo Saratiki and through the different records. They travelled on foot from the great palace to the church of Mary Blanche, Mother of God at Blanchenow. Now, another one of the presentations at the Brood Conference was by Justin Robinson, who looks at the coins of Michael IV. It's really worth a watch because the coin that Michael IV coined looks exactly like the image of the Shroud. I mean, like ridiculously exactly like the image of the Shroud. So that would be 1036. I think he died in, just think Michael IV. I wonder if I've got, anyway, I can't remember the date of his death. I think it was 1041. Just one more last bit and I'm nearly there. So this is Harald Hardrada, who was the king of Norway. And he was a commander in the Varangian Guard in the 1030s. This is from the life of Edwin the Confessor. This is by Matthew Paris. This is his arrival in England to try with Tostig, who was the husband of Judith of Flanders. We looked at the image of her gospel earlier on. He decided to try and invade England and become king. And this is his death. Look at the axe that he's carrying. It's exactly the same axe as the Varangian Guard are carrying in this image from the Madrid Skylitzes. Yeah, and Harold was a commander in the Varangian Guard in the 1030s at the time when the Litany procession took place. And this is my last bit. I looked up what is the oldest image of Jesus in Norway, where Harold was king. So he went to Constantinople in about 1030, and he died in 1066 at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. But this coin has just been unearthed, and it dates to Basil II and Constantine IV, who was Zoe's father. And this is an image just found of Jesus that had got as far as Norway, and has only just recently been discovered. So I think that's me. But one last thing. Those who protected and described the story of the Holy Mandelion, the Holy Shroud, I would argue the Image of Edessa. Well, let's have a look at them. Abgar V, Justinian I, Justinian II, St. John Damascene, the Empress Theodora, Romanos I, Gregory, Constantine VII, Basil Lakapenos, Romanos II, Basil II, St. Vladimir the Great, Anna, Constantine VIII, and the Empress Zoe, Romanos III, George Maniakis, Michael IV, the Varangian and Harald Hardrada. Now, I think, I hope I've made a case that it's unlikely that all of these people did what they did to serve a painting that was made in the 6th century. That actually what they were doing was protecting, preserving the relic of Jesus Christ, his burial shroud. And that's me.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much for that, Pam. Very interesting case, and yeah, I was writing down to my best ability various questions that were coming up and that
Yeah.
sort of thing. So,
Okay, go on. Yeah, great.
all right, so okay, so try and make sense of my writing here because I have so much. Um, oh, okay. So one of the things, first, here's an easy question just to kind of
Go
ask you.
on.
So, at one point, you mentioned that there were three things that were, or three or four things that were common to all four of the Gospels, and the
Yeah,
shroud is one of them, right?
yeah, yeah.
And you said therefore that kind of proves it's primary. So, are you saying that belief in the shroud is an essential doctrine of Christianity in some way? Like, what do you mean
Oh
by
no, no.
primary?
No, no. I don't mean that. Because no, I don't mean that. What I mean is that every gospel has recorded that Jesus was buried in a linen shroud. And now I don't think that any of the gospel writers could have anticipated it would necessarily survive for 2,000 years. In fact, it's quite a miracle it has survived when you look at the fire damage. It's the fires it's been in, including in 1998. So no, it's not essential. I think some Shroud scholars would say it's not essential to anyone's faith. Um, Although I think there really isn't an explanation for it um, that doesn't. I think that the most obvious explanation for it is that it's the burial shroud of Jesus, that it contains his blood that was put there after the crucifixion and the image of the resurrection. I think that would be. Um, but I don't think it's a sin not to believe in it, if you sort of mean.
Gotcha. Gotcha. All right, cool. Okay, so the other thing I just kind of an overall general question, and
Yeah.
I know you asked not to give like a critique of other theories, but just in general,
No.
you are aware that there are other theories out there. The obviously the image of God incarnate or image of Beirut. I'm
Yeah.
just kind of wondering, in terms of your evidence that you presented here today, do you think that which of those evidences are consistent with those other theories versus they only support the image of Edessa theory?
I think I don't really want to go down the route of
Okay.
criticizing other people's work.
Yeah.
I really don't. I mean, I personally think that if the Shroud had been in Constantinople, why was there an iconoclasm? And if it was in Constantinople, why wasn't it destroyed in the iconoclasm? You've seen how vicious Grammaticos was, and Theophilus. You know what I mean? So I think its safety depended on it being outside of Constantinople at that time. But again, I don't want to rubbish other people's theories. I just think that this has a
Uses the
plausibility.
best uses the best
Well,
explanation given that data.
well, uh, given the iconoclasm, given what St. John Damascene said,
Mhm.
given the outpouring of art and religious practice that took place after the arrival of the image of Edessa in 944. Um, you know what I mean? I think it was extremely special.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. All right. So, getting into some of the specific aspects. Okay, so
Yeah,
one of the first things you mentioned there was about the Vinyan markings as kind of
yeah, sure.
connect. Now there have been Shroud skeptics who've criticized that and said, well, look, these Vinyan mark. In fact, I think Paul Vinyan himself noticed that these same markings are in non-Jesus figures. They can be found in some of the disciples or apostles and stuff like that. What
Right.
do you think there's any relevance for that? Like, does that take away from the argument, or how would you respond to that?
Okay. I think that. I think it. Can I just go back to? I'm trying to scroll through here. I'm sorry for all these flashing images before you. I hope no one gets migraines.
No worries.
Let's go back. Let's go back to this schizophrenic church here, where we have two images of Jesus in the same church. Um, and this one looks just so much like the image of the shroud. So the Bible doesn't tell us what Jesus looks like. It just doesn't give us any information at all. But everybody knows what Jesus looks like, don't we? We
Yeah.
all know, you see it on a pizza box or on on the clouds. People writing to newspapers and said, "I saw Jesus." We all know what he looks like. So I think what's interesting, I think, is that you get this image, this sort of halo with a cross through it. You see it in all the ancient images of Jesus. Um, so I think you don't see that. You might see a halo on pictures of saints or of apostles, but you won't see this cross through Christ. Do you see what I mean?
Mhm.
That's very, very specific to how the ancients drew Jesus. So I think no, if I said to you, who's that? Who would you say?
Which one are you pointing at?
This one, this one. Oh, sorry,
Oh, the
this one
first.
here. If I said, who is that? What would you say?
Yeah, like I know it's like a young Jesus, but I would probably, without knowing that the context, I would probably have said like maybe the beloved disciple John or something.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, exactly. He's often portrayed as a young man, isn't he?
Yeah.
With young features. Actually, this is Jesus in the Basilica of San Apollinare. This is Jesus with the loaves and the fishes. So this is the adult Jesus, just not depicted with a beard.
Gotcha. Yep. Yep. Okay. All right.
There's something happened. There's some change happened, and I think let's have a look at this again. I just think there's too much similarity. So you get sort of one nostril smaller than the other. You see that on the shroud. You get the raised right eyebrow. You get, do you know what I mean? It's just too accurate. You get this sort of almost like a goiter here that you can see on the shroud image. The hair parted down the middle. In this one before, he's got a fringe.
Mhm.
Do you know what I mean? I personally think I'm not convinced by people saying that the vignal markings don't actually lead anywhere. I think they're quite accurate.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Perfect. So
Oh, and actually, just one more thing,
yeah,
since we're
sure.
talking a bit about violence, and I talked about it when we were talking about Barry, the wonderful late Barry Short,
Hmm.
is this bruise to the right cheek. Um, you know what I mean? I think you often see that on iconography. Actually, it isn't here so much on this one. You can see it a little bit. You know, that's another one of the markings that I think would associate um, the
Swollen.
shroud with Asian iconography.
Gotcha. Yeah, the swollen cheeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Okay. All right. One thing that was very interesting for me, where is it? Oh, you mentioned the hymn of the pearl, and
yeah, yeah,
so that's a second century document, I think, right?
yeah, yeah.
Now, I'm just kind of curious. So I was interested to hear that you affirm that this is good evidence, speaking about the shroud and connecting it to the Abgar dynasty, but. The only thing with that isn't that like why would the second century document be aware of it? Because according to the image of Edessa, isn't the shroud kind of hidden in the first century and then forgotten about?
I'm not sure that that's true. I don't know at what point it was hidden. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? As I say, I would like to try and trace the diamond pattern on the chest and above the head. And if you argue that that's from Edessa, because the Dyson River burst its banks and touched the bottom of a terracotta jar in which the shroud was folded, then we don't know at what point. We know it flooded in 2000 and what were the dates of the flood? I can't remember again. So we don't know. We know that I think I read history years ago, and I can't remember the source for it, that the Church of the Christians was destroyed during one of the floods of the River Dyson. And in fact, one of the things that the emperors did, that Justinian and his followers did, was to divert the course of the river away from the city so that it wouldn't flood again. Um, so do you know what I mean? I'm not showing it disappeared immediately after the death of Abgar at all. I don't know what the historical sources for that are, and I'm not quite sure when it disappeared. So I think it's plausible that a Syrian writer, it's a similar area, saw it.
Gotcha. So okay, so that's good to know then. So the image of Edessa hypothesis can be modified from it's not it doesn't have to slavishly follow the legend where it talks about the son of Abgar the Fifth becoming a pagan, and that's when it was him. You don't necessarily
Well,
have
I mean, no, I mean that could be true. That could be true, but you also have to watch where history and legend over match. Do you know what I mean? So,
yeah.
for instance, I've just been doing a little bit of looking into the Veronica image, for instance, which is very used in the Stations of the Cross, for instance. The idea that Veronica rubbed a cloth against the face of Jesus, and his sweat from his face on the road to the cross
Yeah.
left an imprint. Do you know what I mean? Well, I sometimes have tried to argue, not always successfully, that actually that was the image of Edessa shown as the face image. And people just saw it and thought, oh, well, it must have been the living Jesus, and someone touched it. Veronica actually means true icon.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? That's the meaning of it. And actually, I came across a translation of the legend of Veronica that's just been done from something out of the British Library. A chap called Thomas, I can't remember his surname, has just translated it. And what's fascinating about it is that it actually talks about the legend of the Veronica. Veronica actually takes the Holy Shroud to Tiberius Caesar, and he becomes a Christian as a result of it. That's the legend of Veronica. It's nothing to do with a face image in this particular medieval translation of that legend. Do you know what I mean? So I think, I mean, yeah, it's about the conversion of Tiberius Caesar, and it contains this story. So I think there are certain things that I think we can point to and say, yes, okay, this is history. You know, the Limburg Staurotheke exists today. We've got the text of the Sermon of Gregory. You know, those things, they exist. There are other things, yeah, I can't be absolutely sure where legend and history match. If you
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. All right, so my last question on the Abgar issue. Okay, so one thing you mentioned, the letters and that sort of
Yes.
thing, right? Um, so I was interested to see that you do use the letters. Oh, sorry, twofold question here. So from my understanding, historians think that the letters are a legendary aspect. So, like, I wanted to get from you if you think they're historical, is it plausible to picture Jesus writing documents? Because I thought he was more of an oral teacher. So I'd like your take on that. And
Okay, well, can I just go back? Can I just find where I put that? Where is it? It's a bit later on, isn't it? Um, I think okay, let's see. It depends to some extent about what you think of the Skylitzes. I personally
I
think
think
it's the only document that we have of this history that's with illustrations that survive. And I would say the letter of Jesus to Abgar is exactly that, the letter Jesus wrote, the autographed letter that Jesus wrote to Abgar. And the reason I would say that is because of the respect with it it's held, these veiled hands.
Mhm.
It's so holy, they're not even prepared to touch it. Do you know what I mean? And it's sent. You know, why would this not be the case? I don't think there's a theology that says Jesus couldn't write his name. Do you know what I mean? So I would say that this is genuinely the letter of Jesus to Abgar. And I would say that, you know, as I talked earlier about Professor Cameron writing 44 years ago, and new things come to light, don't they? So the Madrid Skylitz's text wasn't available online. Um, this image wasn't available online. It is now. Do you know what I mean? And so you can make a hypothesis that says that the emperors, you know, didn't, just treated a fake with such respect, or you can say actually this is the letter of Jesus to Abgar.
Sure. Okay. Okay. And the second part of that is, again, according to the Abgar legend, they always the earliest document. So you mentioned Eusebius and I think
Yes.
Avagarius, but there's also the doctrine of Adai, I think.
Yes.
Um, okay, so these call they call what was shown to King Abgar the Fifth a wonderful vision. They don't specifically talk about it until the later post sixth century sources as like a cloth or an image or something
Yes.
like that.
Yeah,
So
yeah, sure. Yeah.
like why are they being so vague and calling it a wonderful vision? Is yeah.
Well, I mean, I think going back to the dates, they're much later, aren't they? So where have I got the dates? Here you go. So Agraria is 381 and Eusebius is 260. So say, for instance, the shroud the image of Edessa had been hidden before Eusebius and Agraria even come to the city. So what they are going to pick up is legend, isn't it?
Gotcha, gotcha. So it was kind of okay. So they kind of it's later legends intruding in on the tradition, and that gets recorded by Eusebius and stuff. Or okay,
I think that's it. I mean, I think that often happens with history that you know what I mean. You get, I mean, forgive me if some of your viewers are devoted to the idea of the Veronica as an image of Jesus's sweat on the road to the cross, but there's no biblical evidence for that. Do you know what I mean? And I think so. Things do. Yeah, it's about what you can find that you have detailed sources of, and how you evaluate that. What history is doing at the moment. It's very like a science these days. History. You have to have your sources. You have to have your provenance. You have to critique your sources. You know what I mean? So that's what historians listening to what me would say. They would be critique the sources. How reliable is the Skylitzes? How reliable is Constantine's Book of Ceremonies? How reliable is the Limburg Staratiki? How do you know what I mean?
mhm.
How close to the event is it? To what extent is the writer trying to influence people, and what is his agenda? All those sort of things. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So I would think that Igraria and Eusebius didn't see the image of Edessa. Of course they didn't. Um, but that doesn't mean it wasn't there.
gotcha, gotcha. All right, perfect. So the other category of evidence that you pointed to that I find interesting to link the shroud to the image of Edessa or the shroud to the Abgar thing was the water stains, the water
Yeah,
damage.
yeah,
Based on the folding patterns that we can get from the water stains and that sort of thing, it would have to have been in an ancient jar, and
yeah,
only the bottom would have gotten soaked and that
yeah,
sort of thing.
yes.
I'm just kind of wondering because you did mention that there were repeated floods. One objection I've heard is they would say, well, if it was true that the shroud was kept in the Edessan wall, and then there were these floods over the centuries, it would have been soaked. It wouldn't have just covered the little bottom portion. So how would you respond to that objection?
Okay, well, I live in Otley in Yorkshire, in England, North England, where we have a very big river called the Wharfe, beautiful, beautiful river, which floods. There was one time we couldn't get the kids to school because the river had flooded, but then it doesn't another time. So the levels of flood water come at different stages. A river will flood to different heights at different times. Now, this water stain damage, the diamond stain pattern, it's not condensation. I don't believe, because you would have get repeated examples of it. It's a one-off event where the shroud was damaged by water that soaked only to. Let me see if I can find the picture of it. Um, yeah, here you go. The water has soaked larger here, smaller here, getting to quite small here. So the water has, and it has to, so the entry point has to be, we looked at that a minute ago, didn't we? The entry point has to be the center of, or the center here, and it spreads just to this bit here. Can you see? So it's a one-off event in which water contaminates the shroud, but not completely. Do you know what I mean? It just goes so far and then it stops.
Yeah, yeah. It
I,
can,
I, I think it's consistent with the idea that a clay jar was damaged by water from a flood, but was taken out of the flood before. I mean, do you know what I mean? That it was lifted out before more than just the top bottom of the pot was. But the other thing about history is we have to find a history for something. Do you know what I mean? So the incense damage. Let's look at that, for instance. We could say, well, it was on an altar, or do you know what I mean? It happened during a ceremony, like the ceremonies I was describing at Hagia Sophia. The problem is that you have to find a historical source, an event, and then analyze those. You can't just say historically something just happened. You know that there's you cannot make a historical statement without sources and provenance. And basically, the five W's. You know, what, why, when, who, where, why. Oh, sorry, what, I'm being very obtuse and mentioning some of them twice,
I know
but
what
the
you're saying.
five W's of what, you know, who did this, when, where, how, why. Do you know what I mean? And that's what history is looking for. So what I'm trying to do with the image, I would argue the Varangian Guard image, which is misplaced in the Madrid Skylitzes, is to say here is an army that we know was there after 988. They are doing something with a flat object with a three-dimensional head that's dressed in the loros of the emperor. In the palace, what are they doing? Do you know what I mean? And when did this incense damage happen? Do you know what I mean? And so at least although others who would argue, well, it happened when it was on an altar. Show me the history for that. Show me which emperor it was. Who was what was the name of the person who splattered the incense on it? You know what I mean? Who was looking after it at that point? You know what I mean? I'm trying to and the same with, sorry, I'm not being very clear here, the same with this water damage. We have to find a history pre-11th century of when it was in a jar of some sort and was damaged by water.
Yeah, and that was my next follow-up question about this because I think everyone's favorite Shroud skeptic Hugh Ferry when he was on the show with you, his objection was like, well, great, let me just grant that, this water stain, yes, it was in a jar and it covered so high and stuff like that, but he's like, there's no way to date that, and that's where I found like maybe it's a medieval jar or something like that. He was trying to
Well,
say. And that's
okay,
where
well,
I found
yeah,
you had a way of predating the medieval period. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
okay. So I would argue that there's evidence for the diamond-shaped pattern on a lot of art pre-11th century, including things like the Gospel of Judith, of Flanders. But the thing is, let's just listen to Hugh's word, maybe. So he's saying the shroud is a medieval forgery, and maybe it was damaged by water, but I don't know the date that happened. I don't know the event. I don't know the circumstances in which that could have happened. You know, maybe it was damaged by incense, but I can't tell you a day on which that happened. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, what I'm trying to do is to pin down the history. So I'm saying 1036, these are the people who carried it. This is where it was going. This is why it was going. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is a picture of it going.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So I think, and I think one of the problems with the people who don't believe that the shroud is genuine is that they've got to account for an awful lot of damage to it with
Mhm.
no history to that damage. Do you know what I mean? Because I don't think I've ever heard Hugh actually definitively say the incense burned happened. when it was in, let's say, Chambray, and this was the person, and during this ceremony, this is when it happened, and there's recorded documentation of that. Do you know what I mean? Because they were using this particular type of incense. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Apart from anything else, I do think without any question it's incense. It's not poker holes. And the Western style of incense burning tends to be in a closed thurible rather than the Eastern side, which was in an open thurible at this point. So that the chances of incense actually spreading out in an event in the West is less likely than in the East.
Gotcha. Yep. Okay. Yeah, well said. I agree with the skeptics. A lot of times it's coulda, woulda, shoulda. They don't meet their burden of proof. I think that's what you're trying to get at, is that you're
Exactly, and because that's what history demands. I think I mentioned to you, we've talked in the past about this program called Fake or Fortune,
yeah.
which is a program about how our art authenticates art. So there was one recently about Piet Mondrian, and they use all the scientific terminology. They look at it under X-ray. They look at, they do use all the sort of science that Stirp did on the Shroud. But then they also require that you can actually physically take it back to Piet Mondrian. So you've got to have the sources. It was sold in this gallery by these people, and here is the source for that. It's in an archive somewhere. Do you know what I mean? That history is that demanding now. It's like a science, as I said. Do you know what I mean? And the problem with a lot of non-authenticists is they'll just say, "I happened." Do you know what I mean? It happened, and
Yeah.
they're not accurate about their history.
Well,
And
let me push back a little bit. So because I'm,
yeah,
as Pam said, I like the Faker Fortune show myself. I get it here in Canada and stuff. But in terms of these detailed provenances, like a lot of times they're dealing with much more recent artifacts, so, 20th century paintings or 19th
yes.
century paintings. Now, obviously, with something like the Shroud, even if it's as recent as the medieval period, it's just impossible to get that level of detail. We can't meet that. So, like, what I'm kind of curious with the Faker Fortune, if we were able to do their kind of analysis, what do you think, they could do with the Shroud in particular that, would be a good discovery here?
Well, I don't know. I mean, interestingly, I think David Roth once wrote to them to ask them if they would look at the Shroud, but I don't think they see it as art in that sense. I mean,
Okay.
I think they see it as some, I mean, I'm not saying they would say it's miraculous, of course. I mean, but it's so complex, isn't it? It is so complex, and of course, it was hidden for different periods in its time. So it was sacked out of Constantinople, I would argue, in 1204. Um, and the sack of Constantinople was dreadful. So, for instance, the altar, probably created by Constantine VII, is now at the bottom of the Bosphorus. The bottom of the Limburg Staratiki, goodness knows where that is. It might be sort of boiled down or whatever for the gold or whatever. But where was I going with this? I've lost my thread now after all of that.
Well,
What was I saying?
one thing that I think I heard, and I just want to confirm because if it's true, that's huge. So you said David Rolfe has reached out to the people at Faker Fortune, and they say that this is not art. The art
No,
experts are
sorry,
saying
no, no,
this is
no, that might be misquoting. That might be misquoting. They may not have said that, but they weren't prepared to look at it. They weren't
okay.
prepared to do that.
Okay.
It may not be that they said that it was not.
I was
I might
about to say,
be
take
putting
that, Hugh
words
Fury.
into their mouths. But in fact, in some ways, the Shroud is art and it's not art, is it? Isn't it? You know what I mean? It is. It is so astonishing, mysterious, isn't it? Um, but also, I think, on a different tack, you know, academia now has moved very much towards atheism. The media is very atheistic.
Yeah,
They're not going to want to authenticate a resurrection path of Jesus. I mean, it's been promising the last few months, the new information coming out, which the media are picking up about, its likely authenticity. But, there is a lot of anti-Christian thought as well out there in the
for
world.
sure. Yeah. being in
Mm.
Canada. I definitely know about that with Justin Trudeau. So okay. Well, let me ask you this, because you mentioned the altars, and this was something I wanted to ask you
Yeah.
about. So one of the interesting things you said, this altar. So I'm a Protestant. I know nothing about this stuff, but you mentioned it was 14 feet, which just happens to correspond with the shroud. I'm wondering, number one, what about the width? Was it consistent with the shroud's width? No, you don't know.
I don't think he gives details, but also I think that if you read what Constantine's saying, he's putting the altar cloth on the altar, but then he's also putting gold on it. So
Mhm.
the chances are it was wider than the shroud.
Okay.
Um, so he's giving it as a gift. And actually, that's one of the interesting things that if you look back at the faith of the ancients, um, if you look back at what Constantine writes about the Laurus, about the resurrection of Christ, they were so devout compared to how we are today. Um, you know what I mean? And I think that's one of the reasons I struggle with Avril Cameron's view that someone as holy as Constantine VII would just be a manipulative deceiver. He got a painting of a face of Jesus and he was passing it off in this other way. I just don't. Maybe this is just my being sentimental, but I like to see him as someone who is genuine, a believer.
Okay.
In fact, sorry.
Sorry.
In fact, I wonder if I can show you this image. Where is it?
I've
Oh, oh sorry. Have you got another question?
I have, yeah, two questions. One regarding what you're just talking about now, but just before we get to that, um okay, well, let me ask this now then, and we'll come back to the altar. So, okay, you're mentioning that, yeah, you find it hard to believe that this Constantine would be a liar and do all of this over a painting. But I wanted to ask you because Jack does have a response to that. He thinks that the image of Edessa is a painting, but it was based on the actual Shroud of Turin. And because of that close association, they looked at the image of Edessa as though it were special. And that's his explanation. That could explain why Constantine is treating a painting. He's not lying. He thinks this is closely associated with the shroud because it was directly copied from that image, not made with human hands. Is that possible in any way without him being a liar, or that would never happen?
I personally think that Romanos the First was a military commander. He wasn't born in the purple. He wasn't the legitimate heir to the throne, like Constantine himself was. He was a military commander. I just don't think he would have risked his immortal soul to worship a painting. I just don't, particularly in the background of the Byzantine iconoclasm, what had happened in the 100 years before that. I just, I just, I just don't. I think he could tell the difference between a painting and something that is miraculous. Um, and I just don't think he would have gone down the route of worshipping it if he could tell it was a painting.
Now,
Um,
just to clarify, is that because I know for a fact that the Orthodox they do worship or quote unquote venerate paintings and icons because they see them as divine gateways to heaven.
I get it. Exactly.
So are you saying that it's unlikely Romanos would worship the image of Edessa if it was a painting because of the context of iconoclasm that he just came out of?
Well, I think partly because of the context of iconoclasm,
Okay.
really, to be honest. But also, I think Teddy, who is Orthodox,
Mhm.
Teddy Papas, would say that the nature of the blood on the shroud elevates it to something else. In the Council of Nicaea, they're saying don't worship. You can venerate, but don't worship. Um, but then there's something different going on later, and I think it's because it is the blood of Christ. You know what I mean? So it is his body that's represented. Yeah.
They are worshiping this thing, not just
Yeah.
venerating it. There's a clear
Well,
difference.
I think, well, again, maybe this is a mistranslation of the Skylitzes, but that's how it's translated.
Okay.
Um, Yeah. But also, the primary source of Gregory, the day after the arrival, is to say this is not a painting.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yep. Not made with human hands and stuff like that. Okay. So I want to come back to the altar. So this was my second question for you is again, being a Protestant, I know nothing about altars or any of this stuff. Is this a unique size for an altar? Like it's not typical. And or if it is typical, I'm kind of curious, what do you make of Hugh Ferry's theory? Because he does try to present a hypothesis that it's poorly substantiated, but he has this quem queritas hypothesis that the shroud was made for this quem queritas or this Easter ritual involving altars. So when you said that the
Yeah.
altar matches the shroud, I'm like, well, could this support Hugh's theory? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I've been in a lot of churches with the exhibition over the years. I've never seen an altar anywhere near that size.
Okay.
Um, but obviously Hagia Sophia is an enormous cathedral. So now I think, personally, I don't agree with Hugh's hypothesis that that was the creation, that the shroud was created for that purpose. But I think he's absolutely right that they were well, the epitafial. I always keep saying that, spell that wrong, but that procession, which is still taking place today, in the Triduum and in the Eastern Orthodox, that idea of taking the burial shroud of Jesus from the altar to take it to a place, a tabernacle, to rest it. And in Constantine the Seventh, he talks about taking it to the chapel of the Golden Casket. And then on Easter Saturday, they bring it back out and put it on the altar again, ready for the celebration on Easter Sunday. So I think that it's perfectly possible that someone made a version of that. Um, like this ceremony that Hugh is referring to happened in the West as well as in the East. I just don't think it created the shroud.
Gotcha. Gotcha. All right, cool. So another thing about the folding patterns that are
Yeah,
okay, so this is going to be a. All right, just let me ask this. Are you familiar with Jack's criticism on the tetradiplon folding thing?
I'm not. No.
Okay, so I don't remember what it was exactly either, but I think it was he mentioned that Ian Wilson in his books, when it comes to these folding patterns, he goes through different versions and they're inconsistent with what we see on the shroud. Like he made an issue about the portrait versus landscape distinction. Like, if you fold it up, I think you even said it would come out landscape, whereas we're seeing all the pictures in portrait. So there are inconsistencies there. Do you know what that's
Yeah.
about?
Well, but I mean, but if you look at the image of Abgar the Fifth, interestingly, this is quite. I think this is interesting. Anyway, but where's the picture of Abgar the Fifth? Let's have a look at it. That is landscape, isn't it? Where is it? Where is it? Here you go. It's landscape. The image of the shroud. Now, this is quite interesting. This is a 10th century image. And actually, what the artist has drawn, I think this is Constantine VII. This is his face. So they've superimposed the image of Constantine VII onto the story of Abgar V and the discovery of the Holy Mandelion.
Hmm.
But here you go. This is after the arrival in Constantinople. It is landscape, isn't it, rather than portrait? You see it a bit more in some of the other. Let's have a look at some of the other. Um,
I want to come back to that picture.
so there, here, this one, it's much longer this way, isn't it?
Gotcha.
Interestingly, even I think, can you see this diamond pattern here in the background?
Yeah.
It's even there in the famous Christ Pantocrator from Sinai. If you look carefully in the cross, here you go. I think you can just about see that the artist is it's overpainted, but the artist drew that same pattern
What
here in the cross.
this is a simple question that I had. I wanted to ask you when this came up because I saw the crosses on the shroud from what you were saying from the water stains, I think.
Yeah.
And but there was only like four of them, right? So like why in all these pictures like they're doing it almost as though it's like the texture of the cloth. Like why
Yeah,
why
yeah.
would you say this is a trying to
Well,
represent
I mean,
it?
obviously, I think both Ian Wilson and David Rolfe, who's presented it beautifully in his film Who Can He Be, um, would argue that they actually had a sort of like a metallic grill that they put. So they put the shroud folded into eight, so that all you could see was the face, onto a board, and then over the top of it they inlaid like a trellis, a golden trellis, so that all you could see was the central image here. Do you see what I mean? But what I was trying to get at is what was the muse for that trellis, this trellis pattern? And actually, I think it's within the shroud itself, if this water damage predates the discovery in 525. Do you see what I mean? That once
Yeah,
they started showing it, they were looking for a pattern, and actually the pattern is there within the shroud itself. Now, it's just a hypothesis that I only thought about last week, but I find it interesting because you do see it again here. It's the same trellis pattern. Why do they do that?
yeah,
Just
yeah. And that's kind of what I was asking though, because like with them, they have this trellis pattern. Like you see on the shroud, like there's like okay, there's thing, then it's a gap, and then there's like a total of these four trellis shapes, I guess is what you call it. But on the cloth itself, I wish you could see my mouse, but you can't on while you're sharing your screen. But on the bottom right image, like the trellis shapes are
yeah.
like all throughout the width. It's not just like okay, we have one at the top, and then we have one at the bottom. Like they've done it all throughout the cloth
You mean
almost.
here, where I'm pointing? Is you mean at the bottom of the shroud here, or
Yeah, like like between the so on the shroud, like the first go up to the first X trellises or X's kind of thing by
this
the
one?
knees.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this
and
one.
then when you go up from the pelvis all the way up to the elbows, there is no X shapes there.
No, no,
It's
no, no. There isn't. No, you're right. And I'm not saying this is probably not nothing that you know. As I say, Ian Wilson and David Rolfe would argue that it was actually like a patterning of gold that they put over the shroud when they displayed it. But all I was trying to argue is maybe that patterning had its own inspiration from what you can see of the background patterning of water on the shroud.
gotcha. Yeah, yeah. No, I totally get what you're arguing there and that sort of thing. So okay, all right, cool. So all right, let me see. Oh, so with the folding.
Yeah,
Um, you showed it. I think can you go back a bit just until I see it? Because there was one thing that I just didn't. Okay, go forward. One.
this
Nope.
one.
Back. It's the one that has like a bunch of yellow squares on it.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah. Okay, so this one, I don't think I was understanding it. Like,
Okay.
so obviously the shroud wasn't folded. Like you made these folds for it to fit into a certain
Yeah, yeah,
small
of
box.
course, of course. Now, so based on this, so if I would say the inscription is without any doubt a description of the shroud,
Okay.
and if it's true that the inscription on it says that it's the winding cloth of Jesus, which was also the terminology they used, the winding cloth of Jesus was part of the Loris idea, then this is the dimensions. Okay, so this is to try and fit it within these dimensions. Because obviously the Holy Shroud couldn't fit into the Limburg Stauratiki as it sits at the moment. But if the Limburg Stauratiki was a sliding lid for another box, which is now lost, because once they'd moved the shroud to St Mary Blanche, now you didn't need it anymore. Then how would they have folded it to fit it into this shape? Okay, that's where I'm coming from.
Okay.
And so this, now, if the box underneath this area, which is the bigger size of the Limburg Saratiki, was bigger, then it may have only been folded 8 times. So I think so. How does 48 divided by no 4.4 divided by 8 comes to something slightly bigger than 48 centimeters. That's all. But if the box was bigger, it would only need to be folded 8 times. But this dimension fits into the limbic Staratiki dimensions.
Okay. But because we are able to detect, you even presented where the fold patterns are. We know for a fact that it wasn't folded in this
Oh,
configuration?
I don't know that you can necessarily say that. I mean, I don't know that you can necessarily say that. I think um, one of the really interesting things about the shroud is that it's one of the things I talk to children about. Would you fold the picture of someone that you love in half? So imagine a photograph you've got of someone you love, or a painting you've got of them. Would you fold it in half? Would you fold the Mona Lisa in half? And the answer is no, you wouldn't, because you damage it down the main line. Okay, you damage it down the central line. So um, the shroud is folded down the middle all the time, but it hasn't been damaged down the central line, which is one of the great mysteries of it, one of the most extraordinary things, because the image is such a surface phenomenon. So the reason you can pick out things like the water damage and the fire damage is because actually it's damage to the shroud itself. Folding itself doesn't actually damage it. Do you see that? Does that make
Okay.
sense?
So why like certain fold patterns are entrenched in the cloth, right? Like that's how we can, John Jackson has proven the Man of Sorrows. So
This is the really interesting one. The John Jackson one is the really interesting one, I think. But so this is obvious that the diamond pattern across the head and the burn marks. You can work out the incense burns. You can work out those really easily, can't you?
mhm,
This crease pattern. John's saying you can't tell the crease pattern across here because there's so much damage. There's multiple across here.
right.
But there are others, like he's only actually put one crease line through here. So do you know what I mean? Some of them just don't work. And I think his hypothesis, but I might have got this wrong, was that they had some contraption in Constantinople where
Yes.
they wound, you know what I mean? And they raised it up. And that's what accounts for these folds here. And
Okay.
maybe it's the mechanical damage that that machine did to the shroud that means that fold pattern is imprinted.
Gotcha. Yeah, that perfect. So
I don't know. I don't know, but that's just off the top of my head.
yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking perhaps might be the answer because I know that certain fold patterns are entrenched. They show up on backlit transmitted light images, whatever you call it, whereas some don't. So okay. All right. So that answers that.
But I mean, obviously, I'm hypothesizing on a piece of gold that I can't produce. I've looked for it. I've looked for an empty box that fits the dimensions of the Limbo Star Tiki. Believe me, maybe it's in the treasures of uh, St. Mark's in Venice. Who knows? But it's really interesting that after the sack of Constantinople, um, we believe, those who are authenticists would believe that the shroud went probably with Otto de la Roche. And anyway, it turns up at Liry in France and then goes from there to Turin. And that history is quite easy to follow. But the Crusaders were criminalized. They were excommunicated for what they did. You know, um, they were excommunicated for what they did. So that a lot of these things, the shroud disappeared during that period because who's going to admit to having it if you've been excommunicated for stealing? And I honestly think that the travesty of the sack of Constantinople, um, I mean, the Western Christians really need to be apologizing to the Eastern Christians for what happened then. It was outrageous. Do you know what I mean? So this sort of, and actually, just as a matter of interest, I think if you look at that list of people at the end that I put, people who have been involved with the Shroud, I would say that only two of them are saints, St. John Damascene and uh, Vladimir the great fornicator who became a Christian. And I would argue that there's a real case for canonization of some of these other amazing people. Constantine VII, Anna. Anna brought Christianity to Ukraine and Russia, and her husband is the saint, and she isn't. Do you know what I mean? And I think, again, as a sort of reparation, uh, to offer that to the Eastern Church, that we acknowledge these people were great and that they are saintly in what they did, I think is important. And yeah, but So there was a reason I was going to raise that, and I can't remember what it is now. Forgive me, I'm getting a bit senile in my old age.
No, I say that. I have no excuse. I'm like that as a young guy. So, all right, so I want to kind of ask you. Okay, so again,
Wait, no, I remember. Sorry, I remember what I was going to say. I was going to say the Shroud, all through its history, I would say, has been protected by kings and queens and by military power of different sorts. So I would argue that Abgar had it because he was the king, and that Constantine and Romanos and the others had it because they were kings. And I think there was a time when when it's safe in a certain place and then it's not safe there. And I think one of the reasons for the sack of Constantinople and the removal of the Shroud from Constantinople is that Constantinople was under threat, or it would have been. Within 200 years, it had fallen. And now the Orthodox Church is quite small in comparison to how it had been. And of course, Turkey is a Muslim country. So I think, you know what I mean? I think that's, you need people of power and influence. The Knights Templar who sacked it out of Constantinople, I would argue, were the wealthy landowners of England and France and the Flanders. They were the relatives of royalty. They were, a lot of them were intermarried and interrelated. You know what I mean? They had power. They could protect it. The first time I went to see the Shroud in Turin, you could just walk into the cathedral. The second time I went, it was like airport security. You had your bag checked, you had armed guards, you had, airport security, you know.
yeah,
I think that people have tried to destroy it in the past. It needs a certain degree of power to protect it, I think.
so that's interesting. One thing you mentioned about like all the way it's starting with Abgar, and I don't think you could, but I know you don't slavishly follow the legend. So I was going to ask you, like, are you open to thinking, well, maybe it wasn't Abgar the fifth, it was Abgar the eighth that was the first owner, but I think that would contradict the letters. So,
I mean, I appreciate that's Jack's hypothesis. Um, I suppose I would argue against that by saying, you know, the primary text of the letter of Abgar, of the arrival of the letter of Abgar to the fifth, would definitely suggest it was genuine. The way in which they treated it, the way in which they preserved it, the way in which they kept it, the way in which they used it when they were, the reason for the litany procession was because they were starving to death. The rains had failed. There was a sense in which the shroud was being used as a palladium, which it's been used, or palladium, however you use it. It was used during COVID. They brought it out during COVID. In times of extreme crisis, people will turn to the shroud, to this great relic of Jesus Christ, to seek healing. So I think they brought it out at that moment. If they thought it was a fake, I don't think they'd have bothered.
Sure. Okay, so another thing you mentioned, this is kind of getting into the medieval history, but you were
Yeah.
mentioning that, after 1204, you go for the Knights Templar theory
Mm.
that the Shroud was lost in that crusade there. There are documents that post-date 1204 that do speak of a syndon of some sort. So if that's not the Shroud, because the Shroud was taken by, what is this other syndon? Like,
Where was it found? Where was it, or where is it related to?
so there are some documents that date, around like 1206, 1207. One has to do with the funeral, and they mention, look, we still possess the syndon of the Lord.
Really?
Um,
Okay. Yeah. I deleted it from my text just this morning, but in the Robert de Clary text that I quoted from about him seeing the Syndons rise every Friday night, actually, it goes on to say no one knows where it went. So he is a crusader writing in 1203, or writing after he'd been in Constantinople in 1203, saying this syndon of Christ, which was there in St Mary Blanchardai, has now disappeared. We don't know where it is. So the idea that somebody is writing saying, yeah, here it is in Constantinople, I'm not 100% convinced by.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. And my other question, I'm just kind of interested. Again, you don't have to offer any criticisms or anything like that, but I am curious because there are at least three. I don't know how to pronounce the Greek, archaeopotreo or whatever, not made with human hand,
Right, you know.
traditions or images. So I'm just curious. Obviously, one of those is the image of Edessa, and that's the route you go for. But why are there two other traditions, one in Alexandria and then the other one that Jack goes for? Like, where did those other images come from that were said not to be made with human hands? What shouldn't it just be the shroud or yeah?
The legend of Muliana, which I've read, is about a fourth century woman who found a image of Jesus floating on water, and she put it inside a headret, and it created another image. Um, you know what I mean? And I've so I um, yeah. I don't want to I don't want to diss anybody's ideas. I don't. Do you know what I mean? I'm not.
Yeah. No, I'm
Uh,
just curious, like positive, like why do you think?
is the image of Alexandria the one of Beirut?
I
Is
think
that?
so, yeah. I think there's a question whether there may be a fourth one or if it's the same. I'm just, keeping it simple.
I probably don't know enough about the image of Beirut, but I read a little bit about it, and what it described was it was on someone's bedroom wall. I don't know if is that right as you remember it?
Yeah, yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a shroud that's 15 feet long that I bought from the wonderful Barry Schwartz. Um, I've never put it on my bedroom wall. I mean, my bedroom wall isn't big enough for a start. But also, I think it's disrespectful. Do you know what I mean? I just wouldn't do it. As I can understand that an image might have appeared on someone's. You know what I mean? That I've got pictures of Christ in my room, in my bedroom, but I would never put my replica of the shroud up in the bedroom. I just wouldn't. I would see it as disrespectful. Um, so I would question that personally. But I mean, forgive me if that's somebody's
No, no, no.
really
Yeah.
fond hypothesis. Um,
So are you questioning the historicity of the accounts, or like are you saying like I would question whether they actually are miraculous? Because my question for you is I'm
yeah, I mean,
wondering.
I wouldn't in any doubt. I wouldn't be any doubt about there being images that existed at
Mhm.
all. I mean, I'm sure there were images that existed. Whether they were the shroud or not is what I would be uncertain about. Um,
Is-
whether they were the shroud or not. I mean, and they may be, but the reality is the first encounter of the shroud with Abgar led to him being held, or Abgar was healed. Now, some might argue that was because of the shroud. And there certainly are documented cases of people being miraculously healed. Um, so, yeah, and maybe because because in the Catholic tradition, relics are so important, and as we saw in the biblical record of St. Paul, people were healed by his apron, or St. Peter, they were healed by his shadow. Do you know what I mean? I think there are miraculous properties whereby people are healed by certain relics or images. Um, and that's a grace of God. That's a grace of God. I'm not saying doing it to condone idolatry. I just think it's a grace of God that he uses those things.
Okay. Okay. So I see. Yeah. Because my question to you is like, well, what, regardless of which theory you go for, I'm going to ask this to Jack or anyone who goes for the image of Beirut as well. Why are there three images that are said not to be made with human hands? And I think your answer, tell me if I'm right or wrong, but your answer is, well, with the image of Edessa, that's because it was the shroud. With the other images, perhaps there were miracles, healings or something associated with these images, and that's
And
why.
I would think that they're probably copies. without any question, of the miraculous image of Christ.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I think without any question, there'd be copies of that. Um, you know, and there is this wonderful tradition of the Holy Face, isn't there? Certainly in the Catholic tradition of
Yeah.
the Holy Face. And there's a wonderful story of I think he was in Lyon, a guy in the 19th century, and he just basically had an image of the Shroud up in his room, so he was a lawyer, I think, and he allowed people to go um, into his what's it called, lounge or something, and he had an image there, and there were many miracles that happened as a result of people seeing this image. Um,
Do do you think the
it's,
miraculous quality transfers to like all copies? Because you even said like even your copy, which is fully natural and stuff, right? It's from Barry Schwartz. You would treat it with respect. Like, do you think that not made with human hands miraculous quality transfers to all copies or only certain ones? And sorry, I know this is outside, but I'm just curious.
I mean, I think faith is a very interesting thing, isn't it? And I've certainly found people who've come to faith looking at Barry's copies that I have, you
Okay.
know, who've turned their lives around, gone back to faith. I find sometimes the priests have said they hear confessions that are much more honest, much more vulnerable, having seen the Shroud, than that they would do normally. Um, it touches the heart. I see people weep in front of it.
Yeah,
You know, you rarely see people weep in front of the Mona Lisa. You know, I mean, it has a it has an extraordinary quality.
absolutely. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. That was fascinating. So thanks for indulging my questions there. So
Oh,
here's
yeah, no.
here's my last question on the content for you. So something that you mentioned that was interesting. Oh, the epsilon wound and the Hebrew letter for shin, which
Oh, wow,
uh,
yay.
see, I was listening. I picked up on stuff.
Hey, star, star.
So
How did he write his name? Hey.
So I'm kind of curious. So the only thing I guess that I could think of in terms of it being skeptical is obviously you're saying, well, but look, it's turned on its side. It's an epsilon.
Yeah,
It's not the shin, which is, for lack of a better word, I'll call it a W shape, right? So it's if it is
yeah.
meant to represent this letter, why is it all sideways? Like, doesn't that take away from?
Well, well, because if you let's look at the shroud here. I got it the wrong way up, but if you look at my shroud in here you go on display, I've done it this way, so you get the W looking that way. That's how St. John would have seen it. I mean, it's just a hypothesis, but I find it fascinating. What does John mean? You shall see his face, and his name will be written on his forehead. On your forehead. You know, do you know what I mean? They will see his face, and his name will be written on his forehead.
Yeah.
Actually, it's interesting because if you look at it in the black and white, can I just talk about this because I just love this bit. So,
Yeah.
if you look at it in the black and white, it looks like a number three. That's what it's called, isn't it? The number three, but the same. And I've had children say to me before, "Does Jesus have a number three on his forehead to remind us of the Trinity?" A little 6-year-old said that to me once, and I know that Russ Brault has argued that the number three looks like the Hebrew letter um, Sade, which means the righteous one. And one of the reasons I explored this is because a lovely lady at whose name, forgive me, has gone, but she argued that it was the golden gates of Jerusalem. If you turn it the other way, that there's a symbolism here. But if you look at it horizontally, which is how John would have seen it, you know, the shroud is a horizontal cloth. It's not a portrait cloth
Yeah.
in its entirety, in its 15-foot entirety. So I think it's plausible. And actually, can I just say, did you used to watch Star Trek?
I've seen like I watch a lot of like reaction and review things of it and stuff, but yeah,
Okay,
like
okay,
I
yeah.
wasn't
Because you know this, don't you? You know the Dr.
yeah,
Spock's.
Spock's
Yeah, you know, yeah.
live long
And
and prosper or something, right? Yeah.
exactly, exactly. Have you seen him talk about it on YouTube?
Seen who talk about it?
Leonard Nimoy.
No, no, I haven't.
Okay, okay. So basically, he was at a meeting And the rabbis were praying over the people. And you weren't supposed to look because the glory of God could come down. And if you looked, you might die. But he peeked. And what he saw was the rabbis doing this Vulcan greeting over the heads of the people, calling down the blessing of God. And what they were using was the letter Shin. Here you go, Shin.
Mm.
And he goes on to describe it as Shaddai, Shalom, Shekinah. And then years later, he was asked to think of a Vulcan greeting, and he remembered this, and then realized that years later he's blessing people with the name of God as he does that, and he jokes about that. But so it is just an incredibly important letter. And do you know, I went to you mentioned W. I went to a conference at Walsingham recently, and I was talking about it being Shin, and it was a Catholic charismatic conference. This guy come up to me and said, because it was the theme of the week, well, it's a W. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It's a W because it's the word. And I never thought about it before. I mean, I've thought about Shin for years, but it never occurred to me to think about W as the word. It is just a symbolism. It's not more than that, but it's part of the intrigue and the most extraordinary nature of this book.
Gotcha. Perfect. Well, yeah.
And obviously, the word lo is logos in Greek, you know what I mean? But English is the lingua franca of the world, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's words in English.
There you go. Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you so much. That covers all my questions. Let me turn it to you as the guest, though. Is there anything that I missed that I didn't ask you about that you asked?
No, I think you've done a very, very, very thorough job. I wasn't expecting quite so many questions. Thank you for listening so attentively. And I just hope that you find, I mean, I studied history at university, and um, sometimes I always used to prefer the kings and queens to the sort of economic history and all that sort of stuff, because they're such characters, and you can sort of imagine them, and you can imagine their lives. And, so I hope that, you find some interest in people like the wonderful Empress Theodora, and, and Romanos the second, who died, I think, at 21, having had three children. Um, you know, they're just such wonderful people, and I'm sure there's a lot more that we can learn about them.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I'm attracted to the same thing, like the main historical figures myself. So I know that's taboo in modern history. We care about the lay people. Who cares about the kings and queens? No,
Yeah, exactly.
awesome. Well, thank you so much, Pam. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing this presentation, especially since it is Empress Theodora, aka Teddy Pappas's birthday today. So
Absolutely.
I will say
Happy
happy.
birthday, Teddy.
Yep, awesome. So that's it for today. Just so the audience knows, on Friday, I have two shows. So I have the atheist Keith Augustine coming on to speak about near-death experiences. He is skeptical of them, and he provides kind of a counter case saying that it's not proof for life after death. And I'm doing a debate with an atheist, Jordan from Reason to Doubt, not on the Shroud this time, but on messianic prophecies. So tune into that on Friday. And other than that, have a great day, everyone, and take care.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for all you do, Dale. Brilliant.